This is the WLFE-DB radio network, where our shows are your shows, which makes for great talk radio, and you're listening to the Bipolar DM podcast. I am your host, Jason. This is a show about Dungeons & Dragons, independent writing, and living with a mental illness, particularly bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. If you want to reach out to me, we got an email, which is thebipolardm@gmail.com, or you can visit my webpage, www.thebipolardm.com. There you'll find previous episodes of this podcast, as well as my blog and resources on mental illness, Dungeons & Dragons, and indie writing. Facebook fans, we do have a fan page. It is at the Bipolar DM is the handle to find it, or you can just do a search of facebook.com/bipolardm. There we have more up-to-date postings than we do on the webpage, just because it is an easier platform to be doing postings from my phone. And I have videos, I have articles, and I have posts about those range of topics I like to talk about. And for those that are also a fan of the show, we have a private group that you can become part of. That is the Bipolar DM Nation. And if you just do a search on that in groups, find us, and it is free to sign up. All you have to do is agree to one rule, and one rule only, and that's be respectful. You do that, and we avoid having 10 pages of rules before you can enter through the front door. Now, this private group is a behind-the-scenes look on the podcast, kind of how the sausage gets made, as well as my daily vlog, or sometimes several days in a row before I have a vlog, but I do a regular vlog about my life with mental illness and what it's like to live with it on a daily basis. For those of you who have not heard this show before, this is brand new to the network, but we have been around for a couple seasons. So if you go to my webpage, you can see, you can listen to some previous episodes. But the big difference, though, is that this is now an hour-long program. 3 days This is an hour-long program on Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 Central, and we are going to be talking about, we'll be talking about a range of topics that are related to Dungeons & Dragons and indie writing and mental illness, as well as having guests on board and other topics that we want to talk about that are very important to the community. Just a little bit about myself. I am a Navy brat. I was born, raised, and trapped in the United States Navy. My dad was a career petty officer, and I went to 14 different schools growing up. I was born in a Navy hospital, and I graduated from high school at an Army base that was next to our Navy base in Japan. I have lived in 3 different countries. I've studied 6 different languages, and I was a combat medic in the Army. While I was in the Army, though, my first tour of duty, almost 3 years in, I had developed a severe mental illness and had a psychotic break. It later turned out that I had developed bipolar disorder when I was 22. And it basically ended my career in the military. And it really did ruin my life. I started a new career in the ministry, doing gang ministry with outlaw biker clubs, and bipolar struck again, and that ended that. My marriage ended later on after that because of my bipolar. Bipolar has done nothing but take away from me all of my life, and so it's something that I'm very passionate about in talking about. I'm very open about my mental illness because I am not going to be made to feel ashamed by something I have absolutely no control over in my life. And so this podcast is sprung from that, in which I want to talk about mental illness topics. We'll talk about suicide. We'll talk about medication compliance. We'll talk about alternative therapies, service dogs, all kinds of things that are related to having good mental health, as well as surviving some of the worst mental conditions that you can possibly be in. And I have one of the worst combinations of bipolar disorder type 2 and borderline personality disorder, putting those two together, the mortality rate for people like me is significantly higher than the general population. Going back now to what is bipolar disorder? A lot of people have heard bipolar, and it used to be called manic depressive illness or manic depression. And what it is, though, bipolar is a mental disorder that causes unusual shifts in mood, energy, activity levels, concentration, and ability to carry out day-to-day tasks. And this is from the National Institute of Mental Health. Now, there's 3 types of bipolar disorder. All 3 types involve clear changes in mood, energy, and activity levels. These moods range from periods of extreme up, elated, irritable, or energized behavior known as manic episodes to very down, sad, indifferent, and hopeless periods known as depressive episodes. Less severe manic periods are known as hypomanic episodes. And the 3 types of bipolar is bipolar 1 disorder, bipolar 2 disorder, and also cyclothymic disorder or cyclothymia. Now, a lot of people talk only about bipolar 1 just because it's an extremely severe case. But they overlook bipolar 2 or kind of marginalize it, saying that it's just a lesser form of bipolar 1. But no. Bipolar 2 is a distinct and separate diagnosis. It is not a milder form of bipolar 1, but a distinct and different mood disorder. Bipolar 2 is defined by a pattern of depressive episodes and hypomanic episodes, but not full-blown manic episodes that are typical of bipolar 1. So, now, while we don't have those extreme highs, and if you're wondering what manic is, I explained the clinical definition, but here's what the real definition of what it is to be manic. Being manic is like smoking meth and drinking 10 Red Bulls, and that's it. That's what it's like to be manic, and it is so extremely high and so destructive that people don't sleep. They have to be hospitalized because of the condition they're in. That is the extreme of manic. Now, hypomanic, I don't go that high. Yes, it is very destructive, but it's not so destructive that I have to be hospitalized for my own good. And so a lot of people kind of trivialize us, saying we're not really as severe as other ones. But the problem, though, is over the long period of time, though, we have more episodes and more frequent episodes than you do when you're type 1 bipolar. And because of that, I have heard statistics that as high as 50.1% of those with bipolar type 2 attempt suicide in their life. And I do have the statistics on the side there if anybody wants to challenge me on it. It does sound damn high, but yeah, I do have a source that I looked up on that one. And because of that mortality rate and because of the disruption that happens more often with bipolar type 2, some people actually see it as more destructive than type 1. Type 2 bipolar does affect your day-to-day life so much so that you're not even able to take care of yourself. Like, I'm talking about taking a bath, brushing your teeth, washing your hair, feeding yourself, feeding others, making meals, doing housework and chores. Those things just go right out the window when you have bipolar 2, especially when you're struck down with bipolar depression or major depression. Some people like to say that being diagnosed with major depression is redundant because that's a part of being bipolar, but you know what? Try it sometime and tell me. I do have separate diagnosis. I do have bipolar 2 and I do have the diagnosis of major depression. Among others, just because the VA is very afraid for some goddamn reason to take off a diagnosis once it's been placed on there. And so every doctor that I have, and I had a lot of them, every single one of them had their own pet diagnosis for me, and they put it on me and slapped me with it. So that ended up with 7 different diagnoses. Now, I suspect about 4 of them probably should be taken off because they're not applicable, but that's the VA for you. And so I have a very bulky and thick medical record, and yeah, that sucks. And I'll talk more about the VA at another time. I've got a lot I could say about it. I love them to death. More than half of them are filled with veterans who are working for the VA, my brothers and sisters. But the system itself, on the congressional level, it needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed right now, because unlike some of those assholes out there that are demanding like a $15 hour minimum wage, we actually earned our benefits. We earned what we are asking to be given because it was promised to us by the government. They said they would take care of us when we served. Well, when we served, now it's time to take care of us. Instead, they're fucking us over so that they can buy votes by giving somebody $15 a minimum wage. And that is what the VA is all about. Now, getting back to bipolar, though. Bipolar disorder, I mean, it just wrecks your life. And if you want to think about your brain as a computer, and the bipolar, though, affects the hardware of the computer. So you have a crack in the hard drive. While borderline personality disorder is the software of your brain, and it's a bug in the system. And to have both a crack in the hard drive and a bug in the system, I think destruction is going to occur, and quite often. I like to say, and I often do say, it's not if I'm going to go into the hospital, it's not if I'm going to get depressed, it's when I go to the hospital and when I get depressed, because it's going to happen again and again and again, and I have no control over it. And so now you begin to see this picture develop of why our mortality rate of having this disorder is so ridiculously high. It is hard to live with the ups and downs and stuff like that. Sometimes within the same hour, we have rapid cycling to where I'll be your best bud for 1 minute. Then I'll turn on you and be hateful and a bastard to you. And then I'll start crying, and then I'll be happy again. I'll be elated and back to best buds in the span of an hour. I don't do this shit on purpose, all right? I have no control over it. And when people start suggesting that us with bipolar use our illness as an excuse for our bad behavior, yeah, go fuck yourselves, because you know what? I'd rather live like you than have this disorder. I don't like doing the shit I do. I don't like being a bastard. I don't like screwing people over. I don't like doing any of that stuff, but it happens because of my illness, and I have no control over the symptoms. Now, going back to bipolar disorder and some of the parts of it, nobody's really sure what causes bipolar. Some people think it's a genetic disposition, whether, you inherit it from your family or a family member, or some people think it's a product of your environment, some kind of trauma or stressful event. I kind of believe the happy medium is somewhere in between, because although I don't have a history of mental illness in my family that I know of, I did experience extreme trauma and stress while I was in the military, particularly while I was working air evac as a combat medic during the Bosnia and the embassy bombings of Kenya and Tanzania. Diagnosis can be really hard with this illness because you need time in order to diagnose this thing properly. A lot of time, sometimes 6 months to a year, to properly get an accurate diagnosis, because so often we're misdiagnosed or mislabeled, and getting those labels fixed is next to impossible in the VA system. And I know because I tried. Now, some of the symptoms of bipolar are depression, hypomania, anxiety, self-harm, suicide, sex and hypersexuality, and catastrophizing. If you're bipolar, you can check off every single one of these saying, yep, I did it, or I had it. With depression, depression is extremely low for us. My worst depressive episode lasted over 3 years. I'm not talking about feeling down no, I'm talking about I couldn't leave my bedroom for a year and a half. My muscles atrophying because of not being used, and I would get winded just going up a flight of stairs. It took years to get my physical health back up to snuff again after that. And after the depression lifted, though, it was the ruin of my life was before me, particularly my marriage. There was no saving it after what had happened with my depression for so long, and me becoming a dependent upon my wife and her to be my caretaker. It was hard on her. It was unfair, but you know what? I didn't ask for this, and I certain as hell didn't ask to do this to her. Now, hypomania, as I discussed before, is a form of mania, but it's not as extreme. That doesn't mean it's not bad. That doesn't mean it's mania light. It means that the upper limits of it, though, are not psychotic. All right. Now, when I say psychotic, I'm talking about a total break in reality. We don't get that far. So, you have depression, you have hypomania, where it's just like drinking 10 Red Bulls. Instead of just smoking meth and doing 10 Red Bulls, you're just slamming 10 Red Bulls. That's hypomania. It's still extremely destructive and disruptive to a person's life. There's no, it's like easier than real mania. No, fuck you. My mania is pretty damn real to me. And so, hypomania, which is a sign of it, is pretty bad. We have anxiety. I suffer from social anxiety real bad too, especially because of during COVID and being isolated so much, I developed social anxiety to the point where I was not leaving my house except only to get groceries, and that was it, and the necessary things. I lost a job. I had to quit a job with the Census Bureau because of my social anxiety, and that I could not be outside more than 2 hours at a time at the most. Thankfully, though, in last November, I got a service dog, a psychiatric service dog named Harper, and I'll talk about her on another episode, as well as the organization which gifted her to me. She has been a game changer for me, and because of her, I have been able to get past my social anxiety and get back to living my life again. And things are going very well in that regards now, for a change. Now let's talk about self-harm real quick. Self-harm, like cutting, burning yourself, pulling your hair, plucking hair, snapping yourself a rubber band. Whatever you do to hurt yourself, we do this in order to feel. Sometimes feel something different, but most often it's just so we can feel, because we'll get so depressed or so down or so numb that we can't feel anything emotionally, and so we must cut in order to feel again. And it may not make any sense to somebody who's never experienced before, but for those of you who do and have experienced this, you know what I'm talking about when we say we do this in order to feel. Well, this is a sign of bipolar as well. Not everybody does these things, all right, or these tendencies. I have scars on my body from where I've cut and sewed myself up and shit like that, And I have blood all over books and stuff like that, the Bibles that I've kept, that I've cut and did that. I've done some crazy shit in my life, all right? And so, judge me if you want. I don't give a shit because I don't answer to you. But I've done a lot in my life because of the illness that I have, not because I wanted to. I didn't want to do this shit, all right? I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to cut myself. I didn't want to be a bastard to my wife or any of those things. I didn't ask for this shit, all right? I wanted a career in the military just like my dad and his father before him, carrying on the family tradition of serving in the military. And that didn't happen and couldn't happen. And it was a devastating blow to me because that was all I wanted to do my entire life since I could remember. There was no doubt in my mind I was going into the military since I was like 6 years old. No doubt. But you know what? Bipolar is a bitch. And so we got self-harm, suicide. I had mentioned before the statistics on suicide, and they are ridiculously high for us. The average suicide rate within the normal population of y'all is between 16 and 18%, about. For us, though, well, let's see. It says up to 50% of people with bipolar disorder attempt suicide. And that source is actually from the National Health NHS 2016. And page 103, Jackal, a couple of deals from the National Institute of Health and stuff like that, stating that up to 50% of people with bipolar attempt suicide at least once. Those with bipolar 2 are especially high risk. 3 to 20% of those are hospitalized after bipolar symptoms go on to commit suicide. So 20%, so you got 50% attempt, 20% succeed. Yeah. 0.4% annually, around 0.4% of bipolar patients die by suicide. Now, it's worth emphasizing that not all bipolar patients attempt suicide. All right, they don't. It's not. It's just that. It's just that we just have a tendency more because of how difficult it is to live with this illness. It is one of the reasons why we do suicide, is because it is a bitch to live with. When it comes to sex and hypersexuality, it's like being on Viagra and ecstasy together, and the sexuality problem is the hypersexuality is just your part. It's rough on your partner because they can't keep up. They feel bad. They feel used. They feel like that's all you want. And then there's that tendency also because of hypersexuality for infidelity and cheating and stuff like that, which is very common amongst us. Again, it's not that we want to do this shit. Sometimes we just have no control over our impulses and have poor impulse control. A great thing that we do is catastrophizing. And for those of you who don't know what that means we just blow shit up. I mean, it could be something little as, hey, why didn't you answer my text message within 45 minutes or within 30 minutes? Do you hate me? That is bipolar right there. That's what we're like. It takes a lot of self-control for me to not flip out on somebody when they don't answer my emails or my text messages in a timely manner that I would expect them to, because I do. But then again, I don't have one of those things that people call jobs, so yeah, it's kind of tough to do that. But yeah, we blow things up. And we also do what's called maladaptive rumination, which is we have daydreaming that's very negative and destructive. Not just a simple daydream, so much so that we almost, but not quite, break from reality. I mean, we get so immersed in our ruminations and reliving the worst possible moments in our life and thinking about conversations that we wish we had or we're going to have if we get that chance. I find myself talking out loud to myself during these conversations and these arguments that I get in. And I have them all the fucking time. Yes. This is not just a once in a while thing. It happens all the damn time, and I have to live with it, and it's terrible. So we got maladaptive ruminations. Now how is treatment, though? I mean, how do you treat this thing? Because, I mean, you look at this beast that, first of all, it has no cure. There's no cure. And what's worse, for most of us, it gets worse as we age. However, the difference, though, is a lot of us learn to cope with it and deal with it. So while it gets worse, our coping skills get better as we learn and adapt. For a lot of us, not everybody, and it doesn't happen by yourself. One of the first things that you need to do if you suspect that you have a mood disorder such as bipolar 1 or 2 or cyclothymia, talk to your general practitioner and get a referral to a psychiatrist, because you need a psychiatrist to properly diagnose and treat this condition. And it's going to take some time too, so you got to be patient about this, knowing that it's going to take weeks, months, I hate to say it, sometimes years, before an accurate diagnosis comes about. You see a psychiatrist and you get put on meds, and meds are not for everybody. Now let's put this in perspective here. Meds are not a silver bullet that will fix everything. They are a tool in a toolbox, and one of many tools that you need to have in order to successfully survive this illness. And so medication helps with depression, helps with mania, helps stabilize your mood, because bipolar affects the emotional center of the brain, the part that controls our emotions. And it's like having somebody go in and turn the faucet on full blast and then knock the handle off. And that is what it's like every day for us, living with this flood of emotions that we cannot control, ranging from happiness to sadness to rage to apathy. It's all over the damn place, and sometimes it's within minutes or hours of each other that these things happen. And so, when we have medication, we have stability. Now, a lot of people don't want to take medication. You know what? You do you. But damn well better not tell me medication's poison and it's evil and you need to stop it and get off of it. Because I've had people with bipolar tell me that, and then I watch them fuck their lives up, and try to fuck up mine for shits and giggles, because they disagree on my philosophy of medication. Medication is not for everybody, but medication does help. But it's not a silver bullet either. It's not the only thing that you need to have in the toolbox. You need to also do therapy, talk to somebody, all right? Therapy helps. It helps you with your coping skills. It helps you with dealing with the emotions that you are going through. And so I suggest that you go through therapy as well. It doesn't have to be forever. For me and my doc, it's off and on. Sometimes I'm doing therapy for every single week, and then I'll go months and months without therapy. Right now I'm on one of the months and months stage, and my doc knows and accepts that. So, yeah, therapy helps as well. So you got medication, you got therapy. Having a support network is essential to any mental health. That means friends, families, people that you can trust and count on to be there for you when you have a crisis. So having that social network, people you can talk to when things get rough, is important. And the final thing that you need to have, and it's not the final thing, but the other thing you need to have for good mental health, is also a safety plan. And I talk about a safety plan often as, it is a great way to prevent catastrophe from happening, because it is a document a lot of times that you fill out that will say that, first of all, if you have suicidal ideations that you want to hurt yourself, you will not, first of all, commit suicide. And second, you will get help right away. either through going to your friends, going to the nearest ER, checking yourself into the hospital, whatever you got to do in order to, have that break from the world and that break from your illness. So there's a ton of other things that you can do, diet, exercise, all those things help. But the big things, though, is medication and therapy and social, having a social support network, and also having a plan for when you get struck down with your depression or anxiety, and be ready for it. Now, that concludes this segment of the broadcast. We're going to take a break, show a commercial if we get one. We're still kind of putting stuff together, so I'm waiting on some commercials too. But we're going to take a break, and then we'll pick up the next segment in just a minute and talk about what is this thing people call Dungeons & Dragons and what it is all about. So stand by and stay tuned.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome back to the second half of this show, where we're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons and what it's all about and what it's not about. Dungeons & Dragons started about 20 or 40 years ago. Actually, it's back in the 70s when Dungeons & Dragons started by a man named Gary Gygax, the patron saint of Dungeons & Dragons now. Gary has since passed about 13 years ago, but his legacy lives on through Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now, Gary and his friends, what had happened, they were back in the day playing war games with minis. And this was large unit tactics reenacting great battles such as Waterloo, Pickett's Charge, Battle of the Bulge, stuff like that. And they were using dice rolls in order to determine the damage that was inflicted upon the units. Well, Gary and his friends got this idea of, why not we do, instead of large unit tactics, let's start doing some small unit tactics, something that's more interesting. And so that's when they decided to not only do individual unit tactics, but also to create a world that was fantasy based on something they all love, which was Tolkien. If you got a chance to get your hands on the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons by Gary Gygax and his friends, this is something they printed up themselves. And it's very hard to get a hand on some of these because they are so cheaply made. Also, the Tolkien estate sued the shit out of them because they borrowed so heavily from Middle-earth and Tolkien that they had to retract their book and redo it, basically, to take a lot of the stuff out that referred to Middle-earth. And so Dungeons & Dragons was born. And it had a rough go. Through the 70s, it was growing like wildfire. Nobody knew what this game was, and this was out where Gary was from, and I believe it was Ohio where he was at. But anyways, Dungeons & Dragons was growing like crazy, and it was spreading across the nation. And then the 80s came, and the religious right found out about Dungeons & Dragons, and they labeled it as the devil. It was the devil because there was witchcraft involved, because they were casting spells. That means that's witchcraft, and witchcraft means the devil. And then devil means that you're corrupting our youth, and they're going to start drinking, doing drugs, and listening to rock and roll. Well, to make matters worse, some jackass kids that were uber rich and on drugs decided that, hey, they didn't like mom and dad anymore, and they wanted more money. And so in a drug-induced frenzy one night while playing Dungeons & Dragons, one of them offers the other players a boon. I'll give you like a million experience points if you kill my parents. Well, the shenanigans that ensue after that led them in court, of course. And they tried to use Dungeons and Dragons as the influencer, the corrupting influencer that caused them to murder their parents. And of course, the religious right just sunk their teeth into that, and they just went to town on it. It almost destroyed Dungeons and Dragons, but people were like, screw you guys, we're still going to play. I mean, because the way this game is, this is not just a game. Dungeons and Dragons is an experience. And when I say an experience, when's the last time you played Monopoly and then you and your buddies talk about it years later about how great a game that was and how you passed go and collected $200 and how your buddy ended up in jail? No, it doesn't work like that. But Dungeons and Dragons, though, I still recall stories and adventures that are from 25 years ago, that I still play. Case in point. I was playing Dungeons & Dragons in the barracks, in the Army. Some buddies wanted to play. So we got this adventure going. Now, half of them had never played before, so they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. But they were having fun. And I wrote this adventure, and they were, what the idea was is they were going to come to this town. And then they were going to get a job to slay the wizard who was plaguing the town, in the nearby wizard's tower. And so they get to this town. And then I have the guard who's going to introduce them to the job board, approach them. And what does one of my players say? Run. They split off in 4 different directions. So here I am, not expecting this whatsoever, and they go in 4 different directions. So I have to do a chase scene in 4 different directions. I had never done a chase scene before, let alone 4 of them at once. Well, that's not the first thing that they did to make things go off the rails. They had, when it came time for them to take on the big baddie, the wizard, they had previously encountered through the adventure a fire flower, something I had invented. It was a rose with prickly thorns, and when you got pricked by the thorns, it caused fire damage, so it burned. So you got burned by this thing. Using magic and some ingenuity, they were able to harvest this plant and take it with them. And they took it with them to the wizard's tower, where they proceeded to knock a hole into the side of the tower, insert the plant, and then cast a spell called Engorge Plant, which is like Miracle Grow on crack. Well, what happened next was the plant quickly grew and began to consume and burn and destroy this tower. And finally, at the very end, when it reached the top, they hear this, "Ah!" as the wizard pitifully dies alone, having never seen those who had caused his death. Of course, they weren't able to harvest the gold that was there, or the wizard's spell book, which was a great treasure in and of itself, or any of the other things that they destroyed in their very interesting methods of taking care of this wizard. If you think it ended there, it didn't. Upon returning to the town, they proceeded to buy, with their treasure that they did collect, as much rot gut liquor they possibly could get their hands on, barrels and barrels of it. And then they proceeded to pour it down the sewer system. Flammable. Very flammable. They ignite it from a distance with a fireball spell. They detonate the entire town. And why? Because they got in a bar fight and got thrown out of the town. Or got thrown out of the bar. And that was why they were pissed at the town. So, I say that as an example to all you, as a lesson to all you dungeon masters and would-be dungeon masters out there, is that your players can take your game off the rails in a heartbeat, and you need to be prepared for the possibility of something like that happening. Now, you can't anticipate everything that they possibly can come up with, obviously not. But it's a good idea to have in your pocket a couple of backup plans just in case something like that happens. Now, getting back to Dungeons & Dragons, what is this game about that I'm talking about and ranting about? It is, in this essence, theater of the mind. It is collective storytelling. It is an experience in which I, as the Dungeon Master, create the adventure, the story, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like a traditional story. There is a villain, a protagonist, and an antagonist. There's a villain who's an antagonist. There are protagonists, and they're to help you along the way. There are encounters with monsters, with traps, with puzzles, all negotiations, all kinds of stuff there. It's not just hack and slash murder hobo. It's also you can also do puzzles and all kinds of other things that cause you to really start thinking outside of the box. And so you got this game, and then you introduce to that dice for randomness and the chance of failure. Just say, for example, you have a treasure chest in front of you that's locked. You have a lock pick. So you go ahead, and I'm going to pick this lock, and I'm going to roll for it. So you have a roll with a dice, 20-sided dice, and there's a DC, which is the difficulty class of this item, because this is a pretty good lock. So it's going to be kind of tough. So on a 20-sided dice, you need to hit a 15 or better in order to spring the lock. Well, if you hit that number above, hey, you unlock the treasure chest, revealing what's inside. However, if you fail that check, you spring a trap, and a needle shoots out, poisoning you, and then you take damage. That is what it's like playing Dungeons & Dragons with dice. That's what the dice are for, is for that randomness, for that chance of failure or success. And that is what is such a great thing about the game, is that if you're just sitting around and you're collectively telling a story without any consequences, you would hit the monster every time. You would spring the treasure chest every time. You would slay the dragon every single time. But with this, there's a chance that your character could die if you fuck it up. And that's what makes Dungeons & Dragons such a draw, is that chance of failure, that chance of catastrophic failure where all the time and effort you put into your character goes right down the toilet on a single dice roll. And I've had players, get really upset when their character dies because they screwed it up, and they blame me for it before coming up for the devious trap that they're in. But that is part of Dungeons & Dragons, is that. And it is such a fantastic experience to play that if you want to get involved in it, you can for free by going on to dndbeyond.com, and you can download a sample copy of the rules. A basic copy of the rules is about 180 pages. Yeah, real basic. And it goes over everything you need to know in order to play the game. And that way you can get a sample of it without ever having to invest any money in it. But like drugs, the first hit's free. After that, you're going to be paying out the nose. And these books are not cheap. They're about $50 a pop, because Wizards of the Coast, who is the current owner of Dungeons & Dragons, does not have a paperback version of these books. They only come out in hardback. And so if you're interested in playing and you've downloaded the rules and you thought about it and want to get involved, you'll also need a set of dice, which you can get at the Dollar Tree. The Dollar Tree sells Dungeons & Dragons dice now, which is awesome. They're very cheaply made, but they're there, and they're only $1 if you can find them. They sell out very quickly, so you may have to buy a case of them if you need to, for $24 to get 24 sets of dice. But you'll have a shitload of dice. So, and I'm actually considering doing that myself just because I want to buy a bunch of dice. But, with that, you can buy the Player's Handbook for $50, and that is the first book that you would need if you're a player. And really, that's the only book you need as a player, really, is the Player's Handbook. Now, there's other books you can buy to expand upon the universe, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But you start off with the Player's Guide. Now, if you're a Dungeon Master, then you need 2 books, the Player's Handbook and the Monster's Manual. With those 2 books, then the Monster's Manual is basically a book that has a collection of monsters in it and their stats. What they do, how they attack, what kind of magical properties they may have, or spells they can cast, or special tactics they use. All that's in the Monster's Manual. And the third book that you can buy if you're not an experienced Dungeon Master is the Dungeon Master's Guide. So that's $150 right there to invest if you are a dungeon master, or $50 if you're just a player. And to get started, you need those 3 books, but you have to have 2 of them. You don't need the third one, but I highly recommend you get that if you're not an experienced player, because the Dungeon Master's Guide has some additional rules in it and expansion upon the current rules, more elaborating them. But also it has charts in there and tables that you can use to generate random encounters, to generate monsters and towns and what's contained in them, so that if you have no idea what you're doing, with a dice roll in some of these tables, you can create an adventure in just a matter of minutes. Now, the other books you can buy, if you're really getting into this, are additions to monsters, such as Volo's Guide to Monsters, or Mordekainen's Tomb of Foes, or Xanathar's Guide to Everything. They could be expansion of the world, a world for you to play in, such as Eberron, Rising of the Last War. Or they can be a pre-written adventure with a world such as Waterdeep, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, or Tomb of Annihilation. These books are available at your bookstore on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. And, of course, you can buy the electronic version on D&D Beyond at full retail price. Thank you very much, Wizards of the Coast, for screwing us over. But you get no physical copy when you do that. I'll talk more on D&D Beyond on another broadcast about that, and online and virtual tabletop playing, and whether or not it's worth the investment to play online and get involved with that. And the short answer is yes. But getting back to the tactile pen and paper original Dungeons and Dragons and using books, a lot of this stuff you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Some of this stuff is already out there, especially on the internet and groups like the DM Guild and other places, which I have links to those on my webpage under the Dungeons and Dragons resources. Look those up. Check out some of the homebrew content that people have made for Dungeons and Dragons themselves. A lot of this stuff is pretty good stuff, and it's either free or at a very cheap price. I'm talking like 99 cents, maybe $2. You kick a couple bucks over them to help their effort, support a small business, an independent writer, by investing in some of that stuff. And also some of the old adventures, like if you're a fan of the old AD&D 2 and stuff like that, they got on there the old adventures in PDF format too, so that you can get those again and replay some of those, and maybe even vamp them up to 5th edition if you want to play them in 5th edition. One of them is like Waterdeep. Love that one. Love Waterdeep. That is a fun world to play in. But anyways, getting back to investing in Dungeons and Dragons, you can invest as much as you want, because not only is there the books to get involved in, but there's also the miniatures, for combat. Miniatures are used to help mark where a player is in a physical realm and or combat theater. And so you, in relation to the monster and each other. So, like, if you're standing behind in cover behind a pillar, or behind a pile of rocks, you can use that. Or if you are standing out in the open and you're shooting at them, you're out there exposed to everybody to shoot at you and snipe at you. Miniatures can get pretty damn expensive. Now, originally miniatures were made out of pewter, metal. And they're very heavy and they're very expensive. But nowadays, with resin and plastics that are out there, you can get a bunch of miniatures for the same price that you would normally pay for one single metal one. Now, some people are still old school hardcore about metal miniatures and stuff like that, and you need special paints for those in order to paint them. Now, with the resin ones, though, believe it or not, I get by with just using acrylic paint that I get at the at Walmart or the Hobby Lobby or whatever. Those paints actually work very well. If you do the right techniques and some washes and stuff like that, you can come up with some amazing minis. And I'll post some pictures on my webpage on Facebook some of the minis that I have painted with just using acrylic. I also make my own terrain as well. So the setting for these minis to be in, whether it's a dungeon with walls and twists and turns, or if it's a castle, or if they're out in the woods, I have all kinds of terrain that I have made. Fantastic places that you can go to, such as DM Scotty or Black Magic Craft on YouTube, are some great videos on how to make cheap, affordable terrain using common household materials such as cardboard, cardstock, paint, rattle can black, black spray paint, XPS foam or whatever, foam board, all kinds of stuff, and a lot of it's pretty cheap, and you just need a couple tools, some paints, and some techniques, and you can start making all kinds of really cool stuff just on pennies on the dollar instead of buying it offline. I've seen some really cool stuff on the internet and on Facebook even. I get all those advertisings all the time that are targeted at me for terrain, and it's amazing some of the stuff, and some of it I'm actually considering looking into just to check it out, and others I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool, but I'll be fine with what I got when the pandemic lifts and we can start playing again, because right now I got all this stuff that I made, but it's all sitting in freaking totes and containers in my closet because I can't use it while we're playing virtually. Or it's not very practical to use it during virtual play. I mean, it's just not. It is possible. But with the minis and stuff like that, again, another topic for another day. I will go into about minis and making your own terrain and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's fantastic stuff that, getting involved in when you get into this hobby. Because it's more than just a game. There's related hobbies to it that get you involved in. And so you can really fall down the rabbit hole here and really get involved in some of this shit. A lot of fun. And if you're interested in playing, and you can't find a group, you know what? Reach out and contact me. I'm playing virtually. I got people in other states that are playing at our table, and I'll be happy to have you at our table if you're interested in playing, checking it out, what Dungeons and Dragons all about. Reach out to me. Now, we also have a game that's for children and young adults that are on the autism spectrum. This is called League of Extraordinary Adventures. I have an informational video on my group page, the Bipolar DM Nation, that explains it, but I'm going to go ahead and explain now what it's all about, and that is this game is targeted for kids and young adults that are on the autism spectrum to help them have a safe place in order to first have some fellowship with other people that have a similar diagnosis as them, to be able to reach out and do that. Second, to have a safe place in order to be able to act out and to use coping mechanisms, social skills, and other things, and problem-solving skills that in the real world have real consequences for failure. However, in this world, because it's a safe place, the worst that can happen if you fail is that your character dies and you have to start over again. That's the worst that can happen. But with this, they can practice all those social skills, and they can develop the skills they need to use in the real world. And that's what play therapy has been discovering in the last decade about this with Dungeons and Dragons, and companies like Geek Therapeutics, who specialize in training doctors and therapists in using Dungeons and Dragons and geek culture, such as video games and anime and other things, to reach out and bridge the gap to the geek culture and to those who are just immersed in Dungeons and Dragons and video games and other forms of geek artifacts, as they call it, or geek stuff, which I would call. But that's a fantastic program, and I'm actually enrolling in that on the first of the month to get certified as a geek specialist. It is the exact same training as the doctors and therapists go through. It's just that I have a different certification because I'm not a professional therapist. But I learn everything that they do, and I'm able. And also, they have additional classes such as getting certified in as DM therapy. That's not the title of it. That's just what it is. by learning how to use Dungeons and Dragons in a therapeutic session. And that's about 36 hours. It takes about 9 weeks to complete. Not sure what the cost is on that, but it'd be worth it for me to go ahead and do that, especially with what I'm already involved in. But anyways, we're going to have, in a future episode next month, Dr. Anthony Bean, the owner and founder of Geek Therapeutics. He has written several books, clinical books, not easy reading, but books aimed towards doctors and clinicians on how to use Dungeons and Dragons in a therapeutic session. Now, he by far is not the only one doing this. There's other people like Critical Core and others that are been doing research and development in using Dungeons and Dragons and other games for play therapy for, older kids and young adults and some adults as well. Because unfortunately, playing Hi-Ho Cheerio and discussing your feelings like if you were 6 years old is not going to cut it for a teenager, But playing Dungeons and Dragons, acting out your feelings and your rage or your hostilities or your hurts and your pains in a safe environment that's accepting to you for who you are has tremendous therapeutic value. One of the things I am going to be starting in the future also is a Dungeons & Dragons game specifically for veterans suffering from PTSD and other mental illnesses as well. So be on the lookout for that too, because that's on the horizon of some things that are going to be that I am going to develop in the future. I had some questions from people who wanted me to post a video or audio of the game with the League of Extraordinary Adventurers. Like Critical Role does. But no, we are not going to do that because we're dealing with kids and medical issues. And so even though I'm not bound by HIPAA laws, I am still a combat medic, and I respect HIPAA laws and the privacy of my clients. So, however, if we do have a adult game going on and everybody's froggy and down for that, yeah, hell yeah, we might record some games and post them on the internet, or post a show, even post a podcast even of just us playing Dungeons and Dragons, if somebody gets interested in actually listening to it. But a lot of stuff coming on the pipe. It's just down the road. So, and this is only the beginning. So I want to thank everybody for listening in and tuning in, and I especially want to thank WLFE-DB Radio Network for your support in hosting me and my podcast on your radio network. Be sure to go to their webpage, WLFE-DB.com. There you're going to find other radio shows on a range of all kinds of topics, from the paranormal to the homosexual and gay community and everything in between. And then I'm now the geek component of that, so now they have geekness in there. And we have some other podcasts. They're always looking for podcasts. They got radio slots open. If you have a podcast and you're interested in being on radio, check it out. Go to WLFE-DB Radio Network on Facebook. And there you can get a hold of of Ted, who is the general manager of the program, and do a proposal. Show him some sample work of yours if you have it. And anyways, thank you again for listening. Be sure to check out my website, www.thebipolardm.com, or go to my Facebook page at thebipolardm as the handle. And again, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your support. And remember, if you're on them, take your meds.